All right, well, welcome. In this video, we're going to look at how to factor a polynomial using a method called the grouping method. So if you're following along, why don't you go ahead and write down this example, 4x squared minus 9x minus 9. If you notice, the a value isn't 1, so that's why we have to use this alternate method. We can't use a shortcut method to quickly factor this, but this method you'll find is a pretty simple method to use. And so again, the reason why it's called the grouping method is in a minute, we're going to separate this out. Instead of being in 3 terms, we're going to separate it out into 4 terms. But first, what we need to do is we need to multiply these first 2 terms. And I like to do my work off to the side like this, and you'll see why in a little bit. But when you multiply the first and last terms together, we end up getting negative 36x squared. And then we're going to take that middle term, and we're going to write that off to the right there as negative 9x. And so what we're trying to find is we're trying to find 2 values that multiply together to be negative 36x squared. So 2 factors of negative 36, basically, negative 36x squared. Same 2 factors add together to be negative 9x. And if you have a hard time with that, I recommend listing out the factors of 36. Now when you do that, you get 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. So now let's think about the logistics here. We're trying to find 2 numbers that multiply together to be a negative number that add together to be a negative number. So that means if they multiply together to be negative, one of them have to be negative. And if they add together to be a negative number, the bigger number has to be negative. So let's make all those bigger numbers, the numbers on the right there, let's make all of those negative like I did here. And since we're working with x's, all of those terms will also have an x. So now as we look at that list of numbers, we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply together to be a negative 9. And hopefully you recognize that that would be 3x and negative 12x. So remember I said we're going to take and create this trinomial into 4 terms. So the next step is we're just going to bring down that first term and we're going to bring down that last term. That's why I like to circle the first and last terms too. It helps me remember that I'm going to rewrite those, and that middle term that I didn't circle, we're going to break that up into these 2 values that we just found. Now the order of these middle 2 numbers that I have in green here does not matter. You get the same result if we wrote down minus 12x plus 3x. Okay, so that doesn't matter. There is a reason why I wrote it like this, though. You'll see why in a second. All right, so now the reason why we call this grouping is I'm going to look at the first 2 terms here, and I'm going to look for a greatest common factor. So between those first 2 terms, I see that they both have an x, and that's about it. Between 4 and 3, the greatest common factor would be 1. So I'm going to factor out an x, and when I do that, I'm left inside of parentheses 4x plus 3. Now here's where this method gets a little tricky, and this is why I wrote them in this order, because I want you to see this. Here, whatever sign we have here, whether it's a positive or whether it's a negative, we're going to bring down that sign to the next step. Okay, so the fact that that was a minus means that I'm going to have to bring down a minus. Now I don't worry about the negatives, I just look at the 12 and 9, and the greatest common factor between those 2 values would be a 3. So the GCF there would be 3, leaving me with 4x plus 3. And if you're wondering, well, where'd the plus come from? Wouldn't it be minus? Remember, we're dividing by factoring out a 3. This would actually be a negative 3. So negative 12 divided by negative 3 is a positive 4. Negative 9 divided by negative 3 would be a positive 3. So that's where that comes from. Now, you might recognize what's in parentheses is the same. And if you're doing this correctly, that will always happen. So that tells us one of our factors is going to be 4x plus 3. Now, if you notice what's outside of those factors, x minus 3, is going to be our remaining factor for this factored form of x minus 3. So that would be your answer, 4x plus 3 times x minus 3. So the one thing to remember when using this method is when we have it in 4 terms there, so back up here in the second step where we had the 3x minus 12x, whatever sign is in the middle there, this minus, we need to make sure to bring that down. Or if this had been a plus, like if we had switched these around and I had a minus 12x and a plus 3x, the plus would come down. So it's very important, whatever sign is in the middle there, that we bring that down when looking for the GCF of the second group. So that is how we could factor a polynomial using what's called the grouping method.